I stared at the auction house screen in disbelief as the bidding war for my worthless painting reached $900 million. The same painting my stepmother had mockingly given me as my inheritance just 6 months ago, calling it junk from the attic that matches your worth to this family. The memory of that day still burned with crystalline clarity. I had been dying then, literally dying, from the poison my stepsister Emma had slipped into my tea during what was supposed to be my final exam at art school. As my vision blurred and my heart stopped beating in my chest, the last thing I saw was Emma's satisfied smirk and my stepmother Patricia's cold, calculating eyes, watching from the doorway like a predator observing its kill. They thought they were finally rid of me, the unwanted stepdaughter who stood in the way of Emma's inheritance and Patricia's complete control over the Harrison family fortune. But death, it turned out, wasn't the end of my story, it was merely the intermission. When I opened my eyes again, I was 17 once more, 3 years before my death, lying in my cramped attic bedroom in the Harrison family mansion. The same mansion where I'd spent 7 years being treated like an unwanted guest rather than family. 7 years of systematic psychological torture disguised as normal family dynamics. My father had remarried Patricia when I was 10, desperate for companionship after my mother's death from cancer. But Patricia had made it clear from day one that I was an obstacle to her and Emma's comfort and financial security. The memories of my previous life flooded back with crystal clarity, each one sharp enough to cut. Every humiliation, every accident that had befallen me, every time my achievements had been credited to Emma instead. I remembered how Patricia had systematically isolated me from my father, feeding him carefully crafted lies about my ungrateful behavior and jealous attitude toward Emma until he barely spoke to me except to deliver lectures about family loyalty and gratitude. I remembered watching Emma wear the designer dress that was supposed to be mine to prom, a dress I had saved for months to buy with my part-time job earnings, while I was given her old, stained hand-me-down that reeked of her cheap perfume. I remembered the way they'd celebrated when I'd been accidentally excluded from family photos, family trips, and eventually, when I turned 18, the will. But most importantly, most crucially, I remembered the painting. In my previous life, I'd accepted that hideous landscape painting without question, when Patricia had presented it as my generous inheritance after father's death from a sudden heart attack. A moldy, dark canvas, depicting what looked like a violent storm over a wheat field, signed by some artist named V. Van G. In the corner with barely legible scratches. I'd been so broken by then, so systematically convinced of my own worthlessness through years of psychological manipulation that I'd simply taken it to my tiny studio apartment and let it gather dust behind my secondhand couch. This time I knew better. This time I knew that V. Van G. stood for Vincent van Gogh, and that the painting was The Wheat Field with Cypresses, one of his lost works worth over $1 billion, a masterpiece that had disappeared from public record in the early 1900s and was presumed destroyed. The irony was exquisite, almost poetic in its perfection. Patricia, in her ignorance and cruelty, had handed me the key to my own empire, while trying to give me nothing but pain and humiliation. But I couldn't just rush to sell it immediately. In my past life, I'd learned that Patricia was far more cunning and dangerous than she appeared on the surface. She had spent years manipulating situations to her advantage with the skill of a master chess player, and she had a network of lawyers, accountants, and social contacts who would make any direct challenge to her authority difficult and potentially fatal. If I suddenly revealed the painting's worth, she'd find a way to claim I'd stolen it or that there had been a mistake in the will. She'd probably have me declared mentally incompetent or arrested for fraud. I needed to be smarter this time, more strategic, more patient. I needed to become someone they couldn't dismiss or destroy. The next 3 years were a carefully orchestrated campaign of preparation and positioning, each move calculated with the precision of a master strategist. Using my knowledge of future events, stock market crashes, startup successes, cryptocurrency rises, political upheavals, natural disasters, I began building my own resources and reputation. I started small, investing my meager allowance and part-time job earnings in ventures I knew would succeed. I bought Bitcoin when it was $12, investing every spare penny I could scrape together. I invested in Tesla before the Model S announcement sent their stock soaring. I purchased Amazon stock before their cloud services boom transformed them from an online bookstore into a global empire. I bought Netflix before streaming became mainstream, Google before they acquired YouTube, Apple before the iPhone launch. Every successful investment was carefully disguised. I created multiple investment accounts under different names, used offshore banking, and made sure that none of my growing wealth could be traced back to me easily. To Patricia and Emma, I remained the struggling stepdaughter working minimum wage jobs and barely scraping by. But more importantly, I began building my reputation and credentials in the art world. I enrolled in every art history course available at the local community college, then transferred to the State University's prestigious art history program on a scholarship I earned through my extensive knowledge of art movements and techniques. I studied under Professor Margaret Chen, one of the world's leading experts on post-impressionist authentication, learning not just the academic theory, but the practical skills of examining brushstrokes, analyzing pigments, and dating canvas materials. I spent summers interning at major museums, working unpaid but gaining invaluable experience in art curation, preservation, and authentication. I networked relentlessly with gallery owners, auction house experts, and art authenticators, attending every exhibition opening, academic conference, and professional symposium I could afford. I volunteered at charity art auctions, worked weekend shifts at local galleries, and wrote extensively researched papers on art authentication techniques that earned recognition from professional journals. I joined every relevant professional organization, earning certifications and building relationships with the people who would eventually validate my claims about the Van Gogh. I published papers on lost works of the post-impressionist masters and authentication techniques for 19th century European paintings. I gave lectures at art clubs and community centers. I made sure that when the time came to verify my painting's authenticity, I would have the credentials, expertise, and professional connections to ensure no one could question my right to own and sell the piece. All while living under the same roof as my murderers, watching them plan my destruction again with the patient calm of someone who already knew how the story ended. The dynamic in the Harrison household hadn't changed much from my previous life, but my perspective had transformed completely. Patricia still favored Emma outrageously, giving her everything while treating me like hired help who should be grateful for scraps. Emma still took credit for my academic achievements whenever possible, and borrowed my things without asking, returning them damaged or not at all. My father still believed every lie Patricia fed him about my supposed laziness, ingratitude, and jealous resentment toward Emma's natural talents. But this time, I played my role perfectly. I was the grateful, humble stepdaughter who never complained, never asked for more than scraps, never showed any sign of ambition or resentment. I watched Emma wear the dress meant for me to her junior prom and smiled genuinely while taking photos, knowing that in 2 years I'd be wearing custom designer gowns to gallery openings. I nodded along when Patricia explained to guests that Emma was the artistic one in the family, while my own award-winning pieces hung anonymously in the background, signed only with my initials. I accepted their casual cruelties with grace and apparent gratitude, knowing that every slight was adding compound interest to my eventual triumph. The most challenging part was watching them prepare to kill me again, seeing the same patterns emerge with the inevitability of a Greek tragedy. As my 21st birthday approached, the same time frame as my death in the previous life, I watched the familiar signs manifest like symptoms of a recurring disease. Emma began making subtle comments about how stressed I looked, how maybe I should take a break from my intensive studies, how I was pushing myself too hard with my art authentication coursework. Patricia started researching the effects of certain household chemicals and plant toxins, claiming she was writing an article for her garden club newsletter about dangerous substances that might harm pets and children. I found the same poison hidden in Patricia's vanity drawer that had killed me before, a small vial of liquid cyanide, odorless and nearly tasteless, capable of stopping a human heart in minutes. I photographed it secretly, documented its presence, and made sure to create a paper trail of Patricia's suspicious research activities. They were planning to murder me on the day of my final art authentication exam, the same exam where I died at my previous life. The exam that would earn me the professional credentials I needed to authenticate million-dollar artwork and launch my career as a respected art expert. Perfect! On the morning of the exam, I was ready for them. I had already moved the real Van Gogh painting to a secure location months earlier, working with a discreet art storage facility that specialized in high-value pieces. I'd replaced it with an excellent forgery I'd commissioned from a talented artist I'd met during my museum internship. Good enough to fool casual inspection, but obviously fake to any serious expert. I documented every piece of evidence I could find regarding their murder plot, creating multiple copies of photographs, research records, and witness statements stored in safe deposit boxes and with trusted contacts. Most importantly, I'd alerted both the police and several key figures in the art world to be prepared for a major announcement without revealing exactly what I planned to unveil. Emma prepared my tea with the same ritual as before, her hands shaking slightly as she stirred in the clear, odorless poison that was supposed to end my life. Patricia watched from the kitchen doorway with the same cold satisfaction, believing she was about to rid herself of the last obstacle to complete control over the Harrison fortune. My father sat at the breakfast table reading his newspaper, oblivious to the murder being planned 3 feet away from him, just as he'd been oblivious to years of psychological abuse happening under his own roof. But this time, I was ready for them. "Thank you, Emma," I said sweetly, accepting the cup of poison tea. "You're such a caring sister. I'm so lucky to have family who looks out for me." Emma's smile faltered slightly at my genuine tone, confusion flickering across her features, but she quickly recovered her composure. "Of course. You need all the energy you can get for your big exam today. This certification could change your whole life." If only she knew how prophetic those words were. I raised the cup to my lips, then paused, as if struck by a sudden thought. "Actually, you know what? I'm feeling a bit nervous about today. Would you mind taking a sip first? You always said we should share everything as sisters." The color drained from Emma's face like water down a drain. "I... What? Why would you—" "Just a tiny sip," I insisted gently, holding out the cup with steady hands. "For sisterly solidarity. You know how superstitious I get before big exams. It would really calm my nerves to know you're sharing this moment with me." Patricia stepped forward quickly, her voice sharp with barely concealed panic. "Don't be ridiculous, Sophia. Emma doesn't need to drink your tea. She has her own breakfast." "But she made it specially for me," I said, my voice still innocent and sweet, eyes wide with apparent confusion. "With such love and care. Surely she wouldn't mind sharing something she prepared with such thoughtfulness." The silence stretched between us, heavy with tension and unspoken accusations. Emma's hands trembled visibly as she stared at the cup, her face pale and drawn. Patricia's jaw clenched as she tried to think of a way out of the trap I'd laid. I'm not really thirsty," Emma stammered finally. "That's okay," I said brightly. "Just a tiny sip, for luck." Another long pause. I could practically hear their hearts racing. "Fine," I said finally, setting the cup down untouched on the kitchen counter. "I'll just save it for after my exam. Maybe the tea will taste even better once I've passed and earned my certification. I can celebrate with the tea my loving sister made for me." I gathered my materials and headed for the door, leaving behind a cup of poisoned tea and 2 women who suddenly realized their victim wasn't as helpless as they'd believed. I took my exam that day and passed with the highest score in the program's history, earning my professional certification in art authentication and historical analysis. As I walked out of the testing center with my credentials in hand, I called Detective Sarah Morrison, a contact I'd cultivated over the past year through charity events and community volunteer work. "Detective Morrison, this is Sophia Harrison. I need to report an attempted murder." The investigation moved swiftly once I provided all the evidence I'd been carefully collecting. The poison tea was tested and found to contain enough cyanide to kill 3 people. Patricia's computer search history revealed months of research into untraceable poisons, toxic plants, and methods of inducing heart attacks in young people. Emma's fingerprints were all over the cyanide container found hidden in Patricia's vanity drawer. Security cameras from the pharmacy where Patricia had purchased some of the chemical components provided additional evidence. But even as they were arrested and charged, I knew the real revenge was yet to come. 2 weeks later, I held my press conference at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, the city's most prestigious venue for major announcements. Standing in the hotel's opulent ballroom, surrounded by art experts, journalists, auction house representatives, and museum curators from around the world, I prepared to unveil the discovery that would change everything. The room buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread through the art world that something extraordinary was about to be revealed, though I'd kept the specific details secret until this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the packed ballroom, thank you for joining me today for what I believe will be one of the most significant art historical discoveries of our lifetime. I gestured to the covered easel beside me, where my painting waited beneath a silk cloth. For years, art historians have debated the fate of several lost works by Vincent van Gogh, pieces that disappeared from public record in the early 20th century and were presumed destroyed. Today, I'm proud to present to you one of those lost masterpieces. I pulled away the silk covering with a dramatic flourish. The Wheat Field with Cypresses by Vincent van Gogh, completed in 1889, previously thought to be lost to history. The room erupted in gasps and excited murmurs. Camera flashes exploded around me as art experts rushed forward to examine the canvas. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, the world's leading Van Gogh expert and director of the International Post-Impressionist Research Institute, approached the painting with obvious awe. "My God," she breathed, pulling on white cotton gloves to examine the canvas more closely. The brushwork, the impasto technique, the color composition, this appears to be authentic Van Gogh. Over the next hour, a team of experts examined every aspect of the painting using portable analysis equipment. They tested the pigments, analyzed the canvas weaving, examined the brushstroke patterns under magnification, and compared the signature to authenticated Van Gogh examples. Dr. Hartwell finally turned to address the crowd, her voice shaking with excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen, after preliminary examination using spectroscopic analysis, canvas dating, and comparative brushstroke analysis, I can confirm that this painting shows every indication of being an authentic work by Vincent van Gogh. The pigments match those available in 1889, the canvas weaving is consistent with materials used in that period, and the brushwork displays Van Gogh's distinctive techniques in ways that would be nearly impossible to forge convincingly." The crowd erupted in applause and shouted questions from reporters. "Miss Harrison, how did you acquire this painting? Where has it been for the past century? What's your background in art authentication?" I smiled serenely and launched into the carefully prepared story I'd been crafting for months. "This painting has been in my family for generations, passed down through my grandmother's line. My grandmother was an art collector in the early 1900s, and she acquired several pieces from European dealers during her travels. When she passed away, most of her collection was donated to museums, but a few pieces remained in the family. This painting was stored in our attic for decades, and frankly, no one in the family recognized its significance. All technically true, if carefully edited. My grandmother had indeed been an art collector, and the painting had indeed been stored in the attic. I simply omitted the parts about Patricia's ignorance and the attempted murder. It wasn't until I began my studies in art history and authentication that I started to suspect what we might have. I spent the last 2 years researching its provenance and having it examined by experts. Today's announcement represents the culmination of that research. What are your plans for the painting? I'll be consigning it to Blackstone Auctions for their upcoming major works sale. All proceeds will go toward establishing the Harrison Foundation for Art Education, providing scholarships for underprivileged students to study art history and museum studies. Another carefully crafted truth. I would indeed be donating a significant portion of the proceeds to charity, but I'd be keeping enough to establish myself as one of the wealthiest young women in the country. The media frenzy that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. Within hours, the story was trending on every social media platform. Major news outlets picked up the story of the young woman who had discovered a billion-dollar masterpiece in her family's attic. Art experts worldwide weighed in on the authentication, and preliminary estimates of the painting's value ranged from $800 million to over $1 billion. My phone rang constantly with interview requests, but I'd hired a professional publicist to manage the media attention and ensure that every story reinforced the narrative I wanted to tell. Brilliant young art expert discovers lost masterpiece. Plans to use fortune for philanthropy. Meanwhile, the story of Patricia and Emma's arrest was making headlines for entirely different reasons. The contrast was delicious. While I was being celebrated as a brilliant art historian and generous philanthropist, they were being portrayed as greedy, murderous family members who had tried to kill the golden goose. The irony wasn't lost on the media the same week I announced my billion-dollar discovery. My stepmother and stepsister were arrested for trying to poison me. The trial became a media sensation that dominated headlines for months. Every detail of their systematic abuse came to light as prosecutors built their case. I testified about years of psychological manipulation, financial exploitation, and social isolation. Other witnesses, teachers, neighbors, family friends, came forward with their own observations about the Harrison family dynamics. My father, finally forced to confront the truth about his wife and stepdaughter, was devastating in his testimony. He took the witness stand looking broken and aged, his voice cracking as he admitted his failures. I was completely blind to what was happening in my own home, he said, tears streaming down his face. Patricia convinced me that Sophia was jealous of Emma, that she was ungrateful and resentful. Every time Sophia tried to tell me about problems, Patricia would explain it away as teenage drama or sibling rivalry. I chose to believe my wife over my own daughter, and that failure nearly cost Sophia her life. He detailed how Patricia had systematically isolated me from him, scheduling family activities when I was at work, sharing edited versions of conversations to make me seem ungrateful, and gradually poisoning his perception of my character. He explained how Emma had taken credit for my achievements, while Patricia dismissed my actual accomplishments as luck or cheating. Sophia was the smartest, most talented person in our house, and we treated her like she was worthless, he continued. She earned scholarships, won academic awards, created beautiful art, and worked multiple jobs to support herself. And we gave all the credit and attention to Emma, who barely graduated high school. The prosecution presented evidence of financial abuse as well. Patricia had intercepted college acceptance letters addressed to me, declined scholarship offers on my behalf, and diverted money my father had intended for my education to Emma's shopping and social activities. She'd even stolen money from my savings account to pay for Emma's spring break trips. Most damning of all was the evidence of their murder plot. Patricia's internet search history painted a picture of someone methodically researching how to commit the perfect murder. She'd looked up information about cyanide toxicity, searched for ways to make poisoning look like natural causes, and even researched how long it would take for authorities to investigate a sudden death in a young person. Emma's testimony on her own behalf was catastrophic. She broke down under cross-examination and admitted to putting the poison in my tea, claiming she'd thought it was just something to make her sick, so I'd miss my exam. When pressed about why she would want me to miss such an important exam, she cracked completely. She didn't deserve it, Emma screamed from the witness stand. She wasn't even really family. Everything was supposed to be mine, the attention, the opportunities, the inheritance. And she kept getting in the way with her stupid achievements and her perfect grades and everyone saying how talented she was. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict both Patricia and Emma on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. Patricia received 25 years to life. Emma received 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. As they were led away in handcuffs, Patricia finally realized what she had given me. Her face went white as newspaper headlines about my billion-dollar discovery finally penetrated her shock and denial. "You knew," she whispered as she passed my seat in the courtroom. "You knew what it was." I smiled at her, the same sweet, innocent smile I'd worn for 3 years while planning her downfall. "I knew exactly what it was worth," I replied softly. "Just like I knew exactly what you were worth." The transformation of my life was complete and total, but the process took months to fully unfold. The auction at Blackstone Auctions 3 months later was unlike anything the art world had ever seen. Collectors from around the globe participated by phone, online, and in person. The auction house's main hall was packed beyond capacity, with overflow rooms set up to accommodate the crowds. Bidding opened at $50 million and climbed steadily as collectors, museums, and private foundations competed for the chance to own a rediscovered Van Gogh masterpiece. I sat in the auction house's VIP section, wearing a custom-designed navy blue dress that cost more than Patricia's annual salary, watching as the worthless junk she'd given me shattered every auction record in history. $100 million, $300 million, $500 million. The bidding war intensified as it became clear that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Major museums dropped out as the price climbed beyond their acquisition budgets. Private collectors pushed the bidding higher and higher, each determined to own this piece of art history. $700 million, $900 million, $1 billion. The crowd gasped audibly as the bidding crossed the billion-dollar threshold. I thought about Patricia and Emma watching from their prison cells as the worthless junk they'd given me became the most expensive painting ever sold at auction. $1.2 billion and $1.3 billion. The final hammer fell at $1.3 billion, sold to an anonymous collector represented by phone. I was, quite literally, a billionaire overnight. But the money was only part of my victory, perhaps the least important part. The media attention was extraordinary and career-launching. Every major news outlet covered the story of the young woman who had discovered a lost Van Gogh masterpiece and used the proceeds to fund art education. My authentication credentials, my tragic family background, and my meteoric rise to wealth captured the public imagination in ways that transcended typical art world coverage. Within weeks, I was featured on magazine covers, invited to speak at universities around the world, and courted by museums seeking my expertise in authenticating other potentially lost works. The Harrison name, once a source of shame and pain for me, became synonymous with one of the greatest art discoveries of the century. I used my new platform and resources strategically. The Harrison Foundation for Art Education became a major force in expanding access to art history and museum studies programs for underserved students. I funded scholarships, internship programs, and research initiatives at universities worldwide. I also quietly used my connections to help other young people escape abusive family situations, providing resources and support that I'd never had access to during my own struggles, but I didn't stop with philanthropy. I used my authentication expertise and growing network of art world connections to build a consulting business that quickly became the most respected authentication service in the industry. My ability to spot genuine masterpieces among collections of family heirlooms became legendary, and I discovered 3 more previously unknown works by major artists in my first year of operation. Each new discovery reinforced my reputation and added to my growing fortune. I wasn't just a lucky young woman who'd found a valuable painting in her attic. I was a serious art expert whose opinion could make or break million-dollar deals. The personal satisfaction, however, went far beyond professional success or financial security. I purchased a penthouse overlooking the city center, a gleaming space filled with light and original artwork that served as both home and gallery. The contrast with my former attic bedroom was so stark it sometimes felt surreal. I staffed my new home with a team of assistants, housekeepers, and security personnel who treated me with genuine respect and professionalism, rather than the grudging tolerance I'd grown up with. But perhaps most satisfying of all, I bought the Harrison family mansion. My father, bankrupt from legal fees and destroyed by guilt over his failures as a parent, had been forced to sell the family home to pay for his defense attorneys and cover the restitution ordered by the court. I purchased it through a shell company for well below market value, then had it completely renovated and transformed. The attic room where I'd spent my teenage years became a state-of-the-art art studio and authentication laboratory, equipped with the latest spectroscopic analysis equipment and climate-controlled storage for valuable works. The dining room where I'd been excluded from family meals became a gallery, showcasing my growing collection of authenticated masterpieces and promising works by emerging artists. Patricia's master bedroom, where she'd planned my murder and stored the poison meant to kill me, I converted into a library dedicated to books about art authentication, forensic analysis, and fraud prevention. I found a certain poetic justice in transforming the space where she'd plotted my death into a center for uncovering and preventing art fraud. Emma's bedroom became a guest suite for visiting scholars and artists participating in my foundation's programs. And my father? He came to visit me 6 months after the trial ended, looking older and grayer, diminished by the weight of his failures and the realization of how completely he'd been manipulated. "I'm so sorry, Sophia," he said, tears streaming down his face, as he stood in what had once been his own foyer. "I failed you in every way a father could fail his child. I chose them over you, again and again, and I have no excuse except my own weakness and blindness." I looked at him across the desk in my new office, the same room where Patricia used to plan her manipulations and count the money she'd stolen from my accounts. "You did fail me. I agreed quietly, seeing no point in false comfort or easy forgiveness. But you also gave me something valuable, even if you didn't mean to. He looked up hopefully, grasping for any sign of redemption. You taught me that I could only rely on myself, I continued. That lesson made me strong enough to survive everything that came after, and it made me independent enough to build this life without needing anyone's approval or support. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a check I'd prepared for this moment. This is enough to buy you a modest house and live comfortably for the rest of your life. Consider it payment for the years of room and board I owe you from my childhood. He stared at the check, made out for $2 million, then looked back at me with confusion and gratitude. I don't deserve your generosity, he said. No, I agreed without hesitation. You don't, but I'm not giving this to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because I deserve to be free of any obligation or debt to you. Take it, and we're completely even. You'll never owe me anything, and I'll never owe you anything. He took the check with shaking hands, understanding that this was both an act of mercy and a final severance of our relationship. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door of the office. For what it's worth, he said softly, your mother would be proud of who you've become. I know, I replied. I think about her every day, and I try to live up to the woman she was raising me to be before she died. After he left, I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the trappings of my new life. Original artwork adorned the walls, pieces I'd authenticated myself and acquired through my growing network of art dealers and collectors. Investment portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars sat in my safe, diversified across stocks, bonds, real estate, and cryptocurrency. Invitations to exclusive gallery openings, museum galas, and academic conferences covered my desk. But the real victory wasn't the money or the recognition or even the professional success. The real victory was the knowledge that I had taken their worst cruelties and transformed them into my greatest triumph. They had tried to make me nothing, and instead they had given me everything I needed to become extraordinary. Patricia and Emma had spent years convincing me I was worthless, that I didn't deserve love or respect or opportunity. They had murdered me once and tried to do it again. They had stolen my opportunities, my dignity, my father's love, and years of my life that should have been filled with normal teenage experiences and family support. And in return, they had inadvertently handed me a billion-dollar painting and a front-row seat to watch their own complete destruction. As I sat in my penthouse that evening, reviewing the architectural plans for my new private museum and research center, I reflected on the perfect symmetry of my revenge. Every cruelty they had inflicted had been repaid tenfold. Every moment of humiliation had been answered with triumph. Every attempt to diminish me had ultimately elevated me higher than they could ever have imagined. The girl they had tried to erase had become a woman impossible to ignore. The painting they had dismissed as worthless had become the foundation of an empire built on expertise, reputation, and genuine achievement. And the family that had treated me like nothing had discovered, too late, that they had been living with a future billionaire all along. I raised a glass of champagne, a vintage that cost more than Emma's entire college fund, to toast my success. And in the reflection of my penthouse windows, I could see the city lights stretching out below me like stars. Somewhere out there in their separate prison cells, Patricia and Emma were probably lying awake thinking about the billion-dollar mistake that had cost them everything. I hoped they thought about it every single night for the rest of their lives. I hoped they replayed every moment of cruelty, every dismissive comment, every time they'd treated me like I was worthless, and realized that they'd been destroying their own futures with their own hands. After all, they had taught me that revenge, like fine art, was best when it appreciated in value over time, and mine had just become priceless. The irony was perfect, the justice complete, and the future unlimited. I had turned their greatest cruelty into my greatest triumph, and I would spend the rest of my life helping others do the same. Because the best revenge I'd learned wasn't just success. It was transformation so complete that your enemies couldn't even recognize the person they'd once tried to destroy.